A big welcome to our attendees tonight. We'll be starting in just a few moments as we're waiting for others to come in through the waiting room. So we appreciate your patience and we'll get started momentarily. And welcome to our participants. We'll get started in just a couple more minutes once we get everyone in through the waiting room. Evening, everyone. We'll get started in just another minute or so. Again, welcome to those who have joined us thus far. We'll give it, I think, another minute before we launch into the presentation. We are expecting some more folks to join us and give them a fair chance while not delaying you any further. We'll officially start at 5 after, which is in just under a minute. Again, just trying to give opportunity for folks that may be running a little bit late to join us. All right, thank you everyone for your patience and for joining us tonight. My name is Sean Bravender. I have the honor of being the facilitator for the session tonight. We have several staff from the city as well as from the technical team that will take us through a presentation with information, as well as we have a couple of spots where we're keen to get your feedback and your perspective shared with us. We can go to the next slide, please. So within the Zoom format, I suspect many of us are more familiar with Zoom than what we'd like to be. But as we go forward tonight, there's a few ways that we're able to connect with you. Please raise your hand if you have any questions you want to ask. I do ask that during the course of the presentation that you ask questions of clarification, and then we can save the general questions for after, just to ensure we can get through all the presentation with all the information that we can further delve into it. But when you raise your hand, and we'll be able to mute or unmute your mic, this will allow you to be able to voice your concern. Or if you want to use the chat icon, which is at the bottom of your screen, as well as the raise your hand feature, then we will be able to capture those comments in the chat and answer those in order that they're received. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda. I will now turn it over to our Mayor, David West, to provide some introductory comments.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to today's Public Information Center for the Transportation Master Plan. The Transportation Master Plan is a strategic plan that will help support how people will travel in Richmond Hill in the next 30 years. This plan is an update to the recommendations that were made in the 2014 Richmond Hill Transportation Master Plan and identifies multimodal transportation infrastructure improvements for roads, active transportation, and trails, along with policies and programs to support planned growth up to 2051, as identified in our official plan update. In the fall of 2022, the city undertook a public survey that received over 880 responses to collect input on travel in the city and evolving transportation trends post-COVID to inform the Transportation Master Plan update. The purpose of this evening will be to present and collect your feedback on proposed improvements to the city's transportation infrastructure and key direction on future transportation policy. And I will say, I really appreciate all the people that have taken the time out of their day to be a part of this process, and all of the people that have given us input up to this point. Transportation clearly, as I talk to people in my travels as mayor, is one of the most important parts of what we're trying to achieve in creating a community where people can get around easily in many different ways. So I'd also just like to thank Councillor Tree and Councillor Silovitz, who are joining us here tonight. My apologies to any of my other colleagues if they've joined after I last checked the list. But with that being said, I will pass this back over to Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor West. I really appreciate that. And once again, I just want to thank everybody again for taking the time to register and attend our second PIC for the city's Transportation Master Plan update. And for giving a few hours of your evening or giving up a few hours of your evening this evening to participate in this event. So I'd like to start off by introducing myself. I'm Dan Terzievsky. I'm the Director of Infrastructure Planning and Development Engineering with the city, Richmond Hill. And I've been with the city in this role for approximately 10 years now. And I think in that short time, I've seen a lot of changes throughout Richmond Hill and across York Region. It's both the municipality and the region grow and shift from, I guess, the municipality from a town to a city, and the region continues to grow across all 9 municipalities. And at the same time, in the field of transportation, we've seen a lot of evolution in the way people work, live, and get around the city. We've experienced the pandemic over the last few years, which has really changed a lot of behaviors. We've seen the emergence of things like Uber, people working from home. We've seen rapid transit advance throughout the region and through Richmond Hill over the last couple of years or the last decade. And we see the emergence of things like electric vehicles and e-bikes and scooters. And so for that particular reason, it's really important for the city to have a plan, transportation master plan in place, which helps to identify and direct transportation infrastructure needs and policies that will help to support the growth that's being planned in the city, and to be able to readily adapt to the ever-changing transportation advancements and technologies over the next 20, 30, years and beyond that. And this is, in essence, the focus of this transportation master plan. So at this point, I like to take an opportunity to introduce the project team and then hand it over to them so we can begin this meeting tonight. So from the city's perspective, I'd like to introduce Hubert Ng, who is our manager of transportation, as well as Tong Wang, who is the project lead on this. He's our project manager of transportation planning. We also have other members of the city joining us this evening, including Josh Ward, who's our sustainable transportation coordinator and plays a big role in this project, as well as we have representatives from policy planning, and as well as Parks and Natural Heritage as well. I'd also like to introduce our consultant team on this project, WSP, which is being led by Brett Sears overall, and the active transportation component is being led by David McLaughlin and his team. And David, Brett, I don't know if you guys want to do introductions of your team as well before we get started, and then we can hand that off to Hubert to start the presentation.
Thank you, Dan, and good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here as a former resident of Richmond Hill myself for 4 years, and now just living next door in Markham. Still have a high school daughter who's at Richmond Green Secondary School, so a lot of personal and professional connections to Richmond Hill. You'll hear from several people on our team tonight. I'll be speaking about roads and transit, and Dave and Sandy will be speaking about active transportation, walking, rolling, and cycling. We also have Sean, who's our facilitator here tonight, as well as a couple of other staff helping us on the back end to make sure the technology works properly and to make sure that we're capturing all of the comments and questions and answers that go on tonight. Someone has asked if this information will be made available on the city's website, and the answer is yes, just in case you didn't see that in the chat. But we're really excited to be here and glad that so many people have come out to engage with us. And we very much hope that you will engage. We have a couple of activities planned. But with that, I think instead of just talking about it, let's get into it. I would go back to the city to go ahead through this first part of our presentation.
All right, thank you, Brett. And I'm Hubert Ng. Good evening, everyone. And now that we're done the introductions, I'd like to move on to today's objectives. And our team would like to provide you with an update on the TMP's process, present some key information on how active transportation trails and roads are today and how they will be in the future to support growth in the city, and to discuss and gather feedback as it relates to the overall strategy. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As some of you may recall from a few years back, we reached out to you for input and feedback on this study. Our team received direction to put a pause on the project in order to align the TMP with the official plan update, as well as the development charges bylaw update. Our targeted completion of this study is in the fourth quarter of 2023, and it's heavily linked to the official plan's timeframe as well. Next slide, please. I would like to emphasize that receiving feedback from you as well as from key stakeholders is very critical to the success of this project. We have already held PIC number 1 a few years back and launched a very successful public survey last year together with technical advisory committee meetings. And of course, tonight marks PIC number 2. Next slide, please. Next slide. The TMP vision statement was built on 4 key principles of connectivity, sustainability, multimodality, and inclusivity. Richmond Hill will provide a well-connected, sustainable, multimodal, and inclusive network for all users, including pedestrians, cyclists, transit users, and motorists. We will plan for the mobility needs of our community today and for future generations. Next slide, please. So this means that the TMP will proactively plan for all modes of travel to enhance the quality of life, support the community's needs, and provide vibrant, connected, and complete communities now and in the future. Next slide. So before the 2023 Transportation Master Plan update, the city had separate master planning documents that included the 2014 TMP update, a separate pedestrian and cycling master plan from 2010, and a trails master plan that was completed back in 2004. So this TMP update will integrate all three of these master plans into one strategic document. The TMP will identify transportation infrastructure improvements, policies, and programs to support the planned population and employment growth as prescribed in the city's ongoing official plan update. Next. The city will align strategic priorities by providing attractive, equitable, and sustainable transportation options to help residents arrive safely at their destinations in a fiscally responsible way. The TMP also supports a number of ongoing city projects, notably the city's official plan update, as well as the development charges update, where the city is looking to maximize funding opportunities for infrastructure to support future growth, and many other exciting leading edge projects that are underway or have been completed by city staff. Next, please. So in terms of the public survey, we have on the left, we have asked the public, what travel modes do you typically use for your daily commute? And we see that a lot of responses indicate that carpooling or driving, public transit is right up there. And we're very glad to see that there's also a good percentage that enjoy biking, walking, and even taking e-scooters as part of their commutes. And the chart to the right indicates another question in which we asked the public what elements would be prioritized to enhance the transportation network. So these results indicate that road safety, public transit rank amongst the highest in terms of the importance. And also there's a significant interest in terms of active transportation. And we see a little bit less interest in providing new roads and lane widenings as well. The road maintenance aspect really relates to, maybe linked to one of the harsh winters that we've experienced last year. Next, please. The mobility hierarchy depicted here was updated and first formalized as part of the official plan update and adopted as part of official plan amendment 18.3. The mobility hierarchy outlines at a high level how Richmond Hill will prioritize transportation movements with implications for policy framework, infrastructure projects, and development within the city. This update gave broad consideration for traffic congestion, traffic safety, transportation equity, public health, and climate change. New to the hierarchy are considerations for micromobility, commercial vehicles, and electric vehicles. The resulting emphasis from both transportation and land use planning perspectives is on walkable and cyclable streets that align growth with infrastructure, particularly within the city's intensification areas. We believe this prioritization is essential to build the city's structure, implement our intensification strategy, and achieve our city's official plan vision. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll pass it over to Tom.
Thanks, Hubert, and good evening. I'm Tom Wang. I'm a Transportation Project Manager with the City of Richmond Hill. So in this next part of the presentation, I want to talk about some of the key focus areas of our transportation master plan before I pass it to WSP to give a much more detailed presentation of some of the work we've done to date. So I want to start with active transportation and off-road trails. So active transportation has always been a very important priority for the city, especially as a strategy for us to manage growth and reduce vehicle congestion and emissions. And so some of the top concerns that we heard from residents who walk and bike in Richmond Hill were related to safety and comfort. So on our sidewalks, on bike lanes, need to provide more infrastructure related to active transportation and improving connectivity. So filling in a lot of the gaps that are currently there in our sidewalk network. So through our TNP, we're making a number of key network recommendations, including establishing priority east-west and north-south spine networks that will help connect residents to key destinations and transit in the city. Planning for a fine-grained active transportation network within our major transit station areas, which are growth areas along Highway 7, along Yonge Street, where most of the intensification in Richmond Hill is going to happen, and where not everyone will be able to own a car. And finally, planning to retrofit our existing roads, starting by identifying quick wins, which we think of as bike lanes and sharrows and signage, and transitioning to longer term options that provide physical separation, such as cycle tracks, where it's feasible. From a policies and programming standpoint, we'll be developing AT supportive and complete street policies that will be adopted as part of our ongoing official plan update. A framework for micromobility, which recognizes the opportunities of the technology, but also the safety concerns that have been raised by our residents and committees. And finally, programming to extend the existing cycling culture within Richmond Hill. Next slide, please. So transit advocacy is also a very important part of our master plan, and based on our public survey, it's also a very high-ranking priority area for our residents as well. And from our public survey, the top 5 transit improvements that were ranked by public interest includes a subway extension to high-tech, a subway extension beyond high-tech, new GO stations or upgrades to GO service, improvements to AT connections to public transit, and improvements to BRT services. So through our transportation master plan, we're making a number of key recommendations to transit. And I think it's really important to highlight here that a lot of our recommendations, they're not new ideas. They're taken from the 2014 version of the City of Richmond Hill Master Plan. They're made in alignment with the York Region Transportation Master Plan and represents a very early stage of the planning process, which is still subject to future business cases and studies being carried out by external agencies such as Metrolinx. So some of the recommendations we have here includes a subway extension to Elgin Mills that will support growth along Yonge Street and connecting to a future GO station. New GO stations at Yonge, 16th and Carville, and Yonge and Elgin Mills, as well as completion of the rapid transit network along Yonge Street, delivery of the major Mackenzie BRT and Leslie BRT. Next slide, please. So maybe not surprisingly, which is very typical as part of our transportation master plan, we're also planning to make better public roads. So from our public survey, what we heard from residents who drive in Richmond Hill, that some of their top concerns related to driving is related to congestion, the need to provide alternative modes of infrastructure, so infrastructure that can support walking, cycling, providing better connections to transit, improving maintenance, and improving road safety. So through our master plan, we're making network recommendations, and some of these recommendations will include new roadway extensions, intersection improvements, new roads, widenings, crossings, and interchange opportunities. We'll also be prioritizing and coordinating these improvements, as well as the active transportation improvements to better support growth, focusing on just-in-time delivery, and advocating to advance the timing of regional and provincial projects within Richmond Hill. In addition to network improvements, we'll also be developing roadway cross-sections that are tailored to different context areas of the city for local, collector, and major collector roadways. And an example of what a collector road might look like in the city is shown by the image to the right, which has sidewalks on both sides of the road. in boulevard bike lanes, transit supported lane widths, and parking lanes. And I think what I want to point out with this cross section is compared to our current standards, it reclaims a lot of the space back to the boulevard to focus on sustainable transportation. Next slide, please. So looking at emerging technologies, it's part of the more forward-thinking aspects of our master plan. And under the scope of our master plan, we'll be establishing frameworks for emerging technologies that puts our community interests first. And some of these technologies include looking at electric vehicles with an emphasis on providing more public charging stations. And based on our public survey, I think we had an overwhelming response. 80% of respondents said that they would be supportive of having public charging stations, and they will consider an electric vehicle as their next vehicle. We'll also be looking at autonomous vehicles, and that includes microtransit, mobility as a service, and potentially a curbside management strategy that will look to implement more passenger pickup and drop-off areas within Richmond Hill and at transit stations. And we'll finally also be looking at ITS, so looking at ways that the city can leverage emerging or new technologies to improve our traffic signal infrastructure, traffic safety, and parking management. Next slide, please. So some of the key policy frameworks that we're developing as part of the master plan will include traffic safety and data collection. So working very closely with the city's ongoing traffic safety and operation study. We'll be looking at parking and curbside management with the potential recommendation of a future municipal parking management strategy. Looking at travel demand management, with an emphasis on both municipal and strategies to manage new development. Goods movement and goods movement strategy. Road classification, so looking at cross sections for local collector and major collector roads. We'll be looking at active transportation and trails, looking at city cycling and pedestrian principles, as well as design and maintenance best practices. And finally, advocacy for provincial and regional transit. Next slide, please. So now I want to pass it back to WSP to lead our first of two engagement activities. And of course, we want to be able to get to everyone's comments and questions, but I just want to be mindful of time. And we do have a second engagement activity as well planned towards the end of this presentation. So if we don't get to all the questions, we will have that opportunity as well. So I'll pass it back to you, Sean.
Thanks. Thank you, Tom. So as you noted, the session is being recorded, both the audio as well as the chats. And so this is to help us ensure that we're capturing all the comments and feedback and questions accurately and completely. This particular engagement exercise will require your phone or perhaps your tablet or device. You can scan that QR code or type in the www.menti.com. And then the magic code for tonight is the 8402-8226. And once you type that in, you'll see a screen similar to what you're seeing on the far right of our slide here. And not only is this presentation going to be available after this presentation today, but this Menti exercise and our second exercise will also be available for a couple of weeks after the presentation today. So you can come back in and add comments or forward to anyone that you think may be interested and have feedback that we should hear. So give just another 30 seconds or so to get scanned in there. And this actually is probably the hardest part of using this tool. So it only gets better. All right, Meg, let's go to the next slide. And if anyone needs us to scoot back, let us know. The URL code, the www.menti.com is at the top of the screen, and the magic code to get into this tonight. So once you are there, you'll see the question on your device screen. And we're looking for your feedback on what would encourage you to use alternative modes of travel, such as walking, cycling, and transit. So our first comment, fast and furious, is a frequent and fast transit that comes every 10 minutes. And I likely won't be able to read every single one that we get tonight, but I'll kind of pick which ones just so we get a little bit of flavor of what's going on. But all the comments will be captured in our what we heard feedback at the end of the session. So another one with regards to transit, that buses that actually go where I'm going without taking forever to show up. Transit's commented on again. Consistent, reliable transit like the London and United Kingdom subway. A wider sidewalk. More frequent services and better connections. That wider sidewalk, that ties in well with the human-centric street design. A couple more comments about transit, the frequency of transit and fast public transit. And if our communities are zoned to allow for walkability to be more feasible communities of single-family homes, more feasible communities, single-family homes make it impossible to walk to something like the grocery store. And also, don't worry about spelling or necessarily grammar. As long as we get the picture, that is more than ample. If your thumbs are like mine, it's all good. Comment here about right outside our house. A shorter walk to bus stops. In the center of the page, weather permitting, I'm already walking and cycling, but for transit, convenience and cost would be the most important. There was a comment in the chat earlier about multimodal, and you're going to see lots of different perspectives on that tonight. But effectively, multimodal includes everything from your single occupant vehicle to your transit, to heavy truck haul, to cycling, to walking, to micromobility, all the different modes of transportation. And we're talking about several of them here. And dedicated and safe cycling routes. That ties in well with protected bike lanes. And the bottom right, more and better bicycle parking, your end of trip facilities. Easy accessibility within 10 to 15, I believe that's minutes, of walking distance of major centers of frequent services. And better transit to drop off at train or subway station. And sidewalks that continue to main roads. For example, Red Maple Road to 16th. It's noted here a safety hazard. Mixed use zoning. I want to be able to walk to the store. We've talked about width of sidewalks and the need to fill in gaps. The commentary about surface finish selection. Ensuring that the surface of the sidewalk is safe and comfortable. Green streetscape. Looks like our comments are slowing down. We'll give another minute and see if we have a surge in thoughts. Otherwise, we'll go to the next question in our Menti tool. And again, this is available for the duration of the session, as well as for a couple of weeks after the session. And more local destinations spread across the city. And feeder buses to main transit hubs. And brighter streetlights. Okay, we've had no new comments in a minute or so here, so let's transition to the next question, Megan. So same exercise here in the sense of tell us what can the city do to support micromobility and emerging technologies? And the pictures on the side are great definitions of both those, the micromobility, whether it be the e-scooters or the little robots there to bring deliveries, and emerging technologies such as Wi-Fi supported vehicles, autonomous vehicles, just to name a couple. So our first comment, and this is similar to Tong, what you had shared with the survey results, of a big yes to charging stations. A request to make the bike lanes and cycle track wider. And then do not subsidize EV, and EV would be interpreted as electric vehicles. Correct me if that is wrong, but if someone wants EV, they can pay for it themselves. More charging stations with reasonable pricing. Reduce the lanes of traffic for cars and make a safer lane for bike lanes and scooters. And someone seemingly just as passionate with subsidizing EV. Of course, the more perspective and the more opinions we get, the better. That helps us get a sense of the community that we're in and the needs that can help support all. Adapt smart traffic signaling systems. Education on use of some of these devices. People go whipping by you on scooters. Live heat maps. It's a web application showing slowdowns on major roads. Subsidized green technologies make it easier to switch. Hire U of T, University of Toronto civil engineers to fix the lights. Last mile solutions leveraging autonomous or micromobility solutions. And just for quick clarification, last mile is typically when you get off your bike or out of your vehicle where you've parked or the bus, the short distance between that destination and your final destination to where you need to go. A comment here for the last mile travel is they like microbuses. The plan and design for e-bikes, e-scooters, as well as conventional bikes. A need to support electric wheelchairs. Is it feasible for a city this size to have public rentable bikes like they do in downtown Toronto? Subsidized EV vehicles, including upgrade charging outlet at home. Autonomous vehicle solutions. So our comments have slowed up a bit. If anything you want to add, please continue to do so. We'll have another minute or two on this particular question before we transition to the third. Encourage EV vehicles and accessible charging stations. Make laws, but we'll capture that a little bit later. Heated pavements and bike lanes to melt the snow so it's possible to walk and bike in the winter. Connected trams and streetcars or more bus lanes that are connected to the grid rather than having huge battery packs. And light up signs on roads for cycling and directions. Okay. Comments have stopped. Again, opportunity to continue with this for the next 2 weeks. And Megan, let's transition to the final question of this exercise. So this is quite open-ended. We'd love to know what your thoughts are on the topics presented. Any additional thoughts that you'd like to share with the technical team as they consider it in their continued planning on this project? First thought is conduct traffic studies after a BRT or bus rapid transit project has been built to see if it actually impacted the traffic in the area. I think essentially, did it do what it was intended to do? Do not widen the roads. That just further induces demand and creates more congestion. Plan our communities better so that you don't need to own a car to survive. People need to commute year-round, but our winter makes some forms of transportation usable year-round. This should be taken into account. And maintain bike facilities in the winter. Have an app that allows you to request a pedestrian signal when you walk near it so that you don't miss the light and forced to wait 140 seconds. And a clarification, let me reread this. People need to commute year-round, but our winter makes some forms of transportation unusable year-round. This should be taken into account. Adopt strategies and approaches from other similarly sized international cities that have had success. As the population ages and seniors lose the ability to drive, we need solutions that will allow them to get to their destination safely. Keep it simple. Focus on delivering the basics consistently. Publicize carpooling opportunities more. Improved connectivity between GO, TTC, and Viva, including pricing. Remove the center lane bus stops on Yonge, which creates congestion, then improving. Prioritize micromobility and walkability. Apologies, someone is struggling with the tool. They've lost the slide.
Sean, sorry, if I can just help this person very quickly. If you
Perfect.
look at the top of your screen, you should be able to select go to the next slide. In the chat, please let me know if that works for you. Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Thank you. Agreed, make transportation cheaper and free for students. And get the province to fund last mile services. The bus actually went faster when the signal is out of service and becomes stop signs.
And Sean, if I could be so bold to jump in just for a second, if someone has trouble with the Menti, but they're still able to use the chat on Zoom, you'd be free to put your ideas or thoughts in the chat on Zoom as well. As Sean had mentioned, this is sessions being recorded, so we'll get the words that are coming out of people's mouths, but we also get the chat as well downloaded, so we'll have access to that and be able to include that in the comment register. Thanks,
Thank you,
Sean.
Brett. I see the comments are starting to slow down. We'll give it another minute and see if we need more time or if we're ready to go on with the rest of the presentation.
Brent, can I also add that if there's people that are having problems providing comments, I don't know if we are providing sort of a contact for the city where they could even send an email with their comments to staff.
Yes, Dan, that is on our final slide. We have several contact names on that.
So that's another option in the event that someone can't get in.
But a couple more comments come in. Improve the snow removal on sidewalks. An agreement for making transportation cheaper. I may have read that one already. All right, well, I think we're ready to transition. Again, this Menti tool, it will be available for the next 2 weeks to continue to provide your information, as well as an email will be provided at the end of the presentation where you can send your comments in, and the chat. And Megan, let's go to the next slide, please. And Brett, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thanks everyone for providing all of those comments that we were just seeing. And we're here to hear from you in a number of different ways, and that is just one of the tools. And we have another innovative one that I hope will work for everyone once myself and my colleagues are done with our technical presentation. There was a comment in the chat about multimodal, and Sean ably answered that. It just means like all the different ways that people travel, be it walking, rolling, cycling, by transit, car, truck. This transportation master plan is looking at all the different modes that people typically travel in order to put together a network that is viable for all the different modes. There were some comments about don't build or don't widen roads or focus. I think some of it was on sidewalks and whatnot. You're going to see through my part of the slides, we do have some road network improvements, but when we get to the active transportation, the map might look much more robust to you because we have a very comprehensive network that we are trying to make sure some of it already exists in your city, and we're also trying to fill in those gaps and create just a comprehensive network so that the active transportation, by that walking, cycling, and rolling, and the cars, trucks, buses that are on the street can all work together so people can choose the different mode that they wish to travel by based on where they're going and a number of different factors. But as we come up with this network, we are taking input from a number of different places. So there are current standards, policies, and guidelines. York Region, which Richmond Hill is part of, just finished a regional transportation master plan last year. So we are working with them to understand what is going on some of the regional roads. There were some of the larger roads in the city, like Yonge Street, Bathurst, Bayview, Leslie, Highway 7, 16th Avenue, Major Mackenzie, and there's some more as we go north. They're looking after those. Different items have come out also in recent years just to improve the type of cycling facilities that we are designing. And someone also had mentioned in the chat about all ages and abilities, and certainly that is something that we are very supportive of. By complete streets to have a network so people can travel by any mode they choose, and also this idea of equity in transportation so that once again people can travel by whatever mode they choose and they're not at a disadvantage from using one mode over another. And we have sessions like this, and we're thankful that so many of you are here tonight. This picture on your right is from when we were at the Oak Ridges Community Center on the northern part of Bayview Avenue back in 2018, having people come and look at some of the materials like we're doing tonight, but in person. So I think I'm thrilled about our turnout here. So I'm glad perhaps that this might be like the way of the future to reach even more people through these presentations. If we can go to the next slide, please, Megan. Because we recognize that this network that we're using in different modes of transportation needs to connect to a number of different places, be them schools, employment. The office that I work at for WSP is just south of Richmond Hill, south of Highway 7 in Thornhill. So coming like right down Leslie Street through Richmond Hill, you can get there. Just as one example of employment, and there's a lot of employment on the Richmond Hill side of Highway 7 as well, and key destinations. We've talked a little bit about micro mobility or first and last mile connectivity. Those are fancy ways of saying to make sure you can get to your final spot, just like Sean had said, if you get off at this bus stop here on the upper left part of your screen, how do you get to your building, let's say, that you're going to? Is there a sidewalk that takes you there or some other way? Are you going to get your bike off the bus or whatnot? How are you going to get there? There's a number of natural and historic areas in the city, so we want to make sure that we have connections to that. And both for our on and off road. So this is an example of what we'd call like within the boulevard or on road. This is part of the lake to lake cycling path on Leslie Street, but they also have some off-road trails like the East Beaver Greenway and different different facilities such as those that we also want to put in as part of our overall transportation solution. We need to make sure that there are no dead ends, that we're connecting the dots. And you'll see that through our slides and through the recommendations we're making for the different modes of transportation. It's important to have a baseline to understand where we are and where we're going. And on the next slide, you're going to see a couple of maps that look to the future in terms of what is the future population that we're looking to plan for. So if you would just advance it to the next slide, please, Megan. The York Region population in these times, a little bit over 1 million people. By 2051, forecast to be 2 million. Richmond Hill, now I think it's a little bit above 200,000, forecast by 2051 to be over 300,000. So there is a considerable growth that is being forecast for the city as well as York Region and the Greater Toronto Area in general. These two maps, the one in the center and the one on the right of your screen, are showing like today and in the future, using like the darker the red, the more the people. You can notice somewhat of a spine, a north-south spine on both of these, and that is Yonge Street. And certainly if you've been in the city going up and down Yonge Street, you'll have noticed over the past few years, I know I certainly did, I used to live right near 16th and Yonge, that there are a number of different new developments going up. And so that is where the bus rapid transit is located. That's where a lot of investment has been made in alternative transportation. So that is where the city is looking to focus growth as well. You can also see an east-west darker area along the southern boundary, which is Highway 7. And so also there you can see a population increasing. The North Leslie lands, you'll see have been darker if you compare the 2016 to 2051. And there's one place, West Gormley, in the top right-hand corner, just on the north side of Stouffville Road, you'll see is fairly, not as many people in 2016 or around these times, but that area is scheduled for development. They already have some houses up there as well, so you can see that. So it's important to understand that the city is expected to grow and the region is expected to grow, because the city is not an island. So we need to consider that when we look to the future. And so in our next slide, we just have a cover slide here to say, as part of our process, using the municipal class environmental assessment process for a transportation master plan, which is an accepted process in Ontario, we need to consider alternatives. We don't just have one idea and then say that's the only way we're going to go. We want to consider different alternatives. So as we go to the next slides, we're going to talk about those. So in this section, I'll talk about that. So we have collected information to understand those existing conditions. We need to know where we are to understand where we are going. We've looked to identify potential routes, not just for one type of transportation, but for the different major types that we're studying here: walking, cycling, the road network, recognizing that the buses are running on that road network. We look at different options. We want your input. That's why we're here tonight. And input from others like York Region that provide input into this process, so that we can eventually come up with a multimodal, once again, those different modes, a holistic network for the city that we can recommend. Eventually it'll go to your council for consideration, adoption, and implementation. We can always do nothing. And so that is also a baseline. That is always considered like one of the options. We could do nothing and just see what happens. But I'm a planner by trade and by personality. And so I like to try to forecast the future and then come up with a solution that's going to work best for us. So putting aside the do nothing, we have started with what we call a scenario 1, and that's on our next slide. If we go to that, please. And this is looking at what the province of Ontario, the Ministry of Transportation, and York Region have already been planning. If you've been on Highway 404 anytime recently, you'll know that there are ongoing construction on some high occupancy vehicle lanes as they extend them north from their current terminus to go further north. We've seen just in the last decade the Viva system come on with their bus rapid transit, and now that is looking to also be expanded to run as well along Leslie Street for an extent and Major Mackenzie Drive. You might have noticed on Leslie Street, they've already started with those articulated buses, or the longer than typical buses, or bendy bus, if you wanted to call it that, as well as some of the stops will tell you when the next bus is coming as they get ready to go to bus rapid transit. There are some of our regional roads that are planned to be widened through York Region. And then a big item that you might be well aware of, the subway coming to the southern extent of Richmond Hill, and possibly conceptually even going further north than that. So there's a number of things that the province and the region are planning, and we looked at those to see, will this be sufficient, or do we think additional improvements would be needed? And so through our analysis, we have determined we do think that additional improvements other than just these would be needed, and that's shown on our next slide, or at least we begin to introduce it on our next slide. If we can go to that, please, Megan. And so in here, we focused a lot of our efforts along these MTSAs, as Tong identified earlier, major transit station areas, primarily where our bus rapid transit is running along Highway 7, east-west, and north-south along Yonge Street. And we also have the two blue circles. The southern one would be the North Leslie lands, which is actively under development. And then the northern one is the West Gormley, which also is under development. Trying to see, like, are there strategic locations where we put in a new road, possibly widen the road, some type of a connection, sometimes for capacity, sometimes for connectivity to help people get around. And so we'll have an exercise where you can look more closely at these. But I want to explain a little bit about how we came up with where we want to do our road improvements. So as we transition to our next slide, we have some technical slides here that are talking about just like a general flow of vehicle traffic. And this is showing us the AM peak hour, and you can see the direction of the arrows is somewhat saying the direction of the travel. So it's probably not a surprise to most on this call that the main direction of travel in the morning on a typical weekday would be southbound to the employment areas in Richmond Hill, or south further into the city of Toronto. And so if we only went with our option number one, just the regional and provincial improvements, we still would be seeing fairly congested conditions in this 2051. So we've tried to put in some additional improvements to help alleviate that. So if you compare the map on your left to the map on your right, the darker the red, the more congested is expected to be. So you see the map on the right is somewhat less congested than the map on the left. The outlier here is right near Elgin Mills Road, and I just wanted to clarify, part of that reason is a number of the York Region improvements maybe go up to Elgin Mills, but not further north. So there could be potentially a little bit of a bottleneck north of Elgin Mills. We still see a lot of demand on Highway 404, which many of you might be well aware of, but we do see that scenario 2 that takes what the region and the province are doing and adding some city improvements would come out with a better performance in the transportation network. So that was looking north-south. On the next slide, we look east-west. So if you could please thank you, Megan. So here you'll see like the arrows are pointing toward Highway 404. Once again, probably not very surprising. In the morning, there'll be more people going toward Highway 404 than say toward the west, like toward Vaughan, although you still see some traffic, of course, going that way. And some traffic also going to Leslie Street as they come down to the employment area in Richmond Hill and further south, like we're just south of Richmond Hill along Leslie Street ourselves at WSP. And once again, as we compare these, we can see some improvement with the screen on your right as we look for strategic areas to improve the road network for buses and cars and trucks. And then you'll also see in just a couple of slides, any improvement we make to the road, we match it with an appropriate improvement for walking, rolling, and cycling at the same time if there's not something there today. I want to keep going to our next slide to talk a little bit in a little bit more detail, like what are some of the items we're doing. Here, we're looking at the Yonge Street corridor from Highway 7 up to Major Mackenzie. And so along this corridor, if you look to your left and then you look to the right, you'll see on the right side, there are some dark black lines where there is some improvement being planned. And so as you've seen along Yonge Street, some new big developments going up, the city has an opportunity to get some land as part of that development application, part of the permission to develop. So potentially one day there could be a parallel road on the west side of Yonge Street from Garden Avenue, just north of Highway 7 up to 16th in Carville. That side would actually be Carville. So we're looking at some improvements in that area, some improvements across. Like if you can imagine Garden Avenue going all the way across and through like the south side of the parking lot where the Home Depot and the Brick and the PetSmart and all of those big box stores are, that would connect over to Bayview Avenue. So some improvements here in the south part of the city and along the Yonge Street corridor to provide local access and alternatives, better connectivity in this area. I see a comment here. I'm just going to try to speak to that about the Garden Avenue to Carville. So this is something that, one thing we should say is we have to remember this is the year 2051. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen the day after tomorrow. But this is a long range plan that could potentially provide better connectivity throughout the city or in at least certain parts of the city. If you can think, if you've ever been in Toronto around North York Center, Yonge Street has Doris and Beecroft parallel to it. This street would not be to that extent, but it would provide some local access and help alleviate some traffic on Yonge Street. So this is like a long range plan, and we're looking for opportunities to do this along the Yonge Street corridor. There are two other areas that I want to touch upon on these. And that is, so if we can go to the next slide, please. If there's questions in the chat, I'm only so good at multitasking, but we're happy to answer those at the end of our presentation. Here we're looking at Yonge Street around the Bernard terminal. If you've ever been on the Viva bus or the local bus up to Bernard, Yonge and Elgin Mills, Yonge and Bernard, we see some opportunities here. Also, like Newkirk Road provides access to the Richmond Hill GO train station. So we've shown some improvements there. So if you look on the right where you're seeing these black lines, that's where we're doing some improvements if you compare these two. And we'll have a map that you can zoom in on in just a few slides as part of our next engagement activity. Once again, we're not looking for a wholesale road widening. We're not looking for a wholesale road construction, but we do want to make it more efficient for travel and for connectivity, and to help to make sure people can get where they want to go in a reasonable amount of time. So we think like providing better access to the GO station certainly could help that. And sometimes to help alleviate some of the congestion along Yonge Street, we have different ideas shown here around the Bernard terminal and even this Elgin Mills and Yonge Street area to make some new connections. One more slide, and then I'm going to talk about in overall what we're doing. And this is a lot of the business area of Richmond Hill as we look from like Highway 7 up to Major Mackenzie Drive, parallel to the 404 corridor. Trying to complete some of these roads, like the East and West Beaver Creek Loop. Sometimes it's 1 lane, sometimes it's 3 lanes, sometimes it's 4 lanes. So we're trying to make it consistent all the way around for 4 lanes. You may have gone up through the Vogel Road area, and so it doesn't extend all the way up to Major Mackenzie Drive, but in the fullness of time, once again, taking the long range view to 2051 and beyond, we could see that corridor being developed parallel to Leslie Street. Leslie Street is a street that I have biked, bussed, and driven on, and if you have, then you know it is a major corridor for multimodal travel. And so this would be a parallel corridor that would help this whole area, these business parks, and also getting people to and from north to south. I have just a few more slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to our active transportation team. So we just want to talk for a moment about the recommended network scenario, or our preliminary draft recommendation. The thing I want you to notice here is you have to squint to see the dotted lines, and then you'll be able to compare this to our active transportation slide in just a couple of slides, and you'll see that the active transportation slide has many more dotted lines than here. We are recommending select improvements, select intersection improvements, potentially grade separation with rail, and some kilometers of new or improved roads, providing oftentimes better connectivity, sometimes capacity. These are throughout the city, focused primarily though along the growth areas, along Highway 7, along the Young corridor, and also recognizing the secondary plan areas are the North Leslie lands that are under development, and West Gormley. And then also we have a slide on the next slide, if we go there, please, Megan, on the transit network. Now, I think a couple of us have already said, like, the city does not actively control the transit. You might be very well aware of that. There's certainly a stakeholder in York Region Transit and in Go Transit, but they don't actively control that. But we are excited about the opportunities that transit provides to Richmond Hill, and we want to support and promote those through the transportation master plan, because we believe they are an essential component of the overall city transportation master plan. And that can include the subway extension to High Tech Road in the south part, and even dreaming about extending that further north. Improved all-day two-way service on the GO line. I've taken that. We have an office right next to Union Station downtown. I've taken it from Richmond Hill GO. I've taken it from Langstaff GO. Efficient way to get downtown. A lot easier on my nerves for taking, as opposed to trying to drive and pay for parking. And a little bit more locally, Leslie Street and Major Mackenzie, two major corridors in the city, slated to have their own rapid transit, similar to Highway 7 and Young Street. And then also even the transitway on the 407, just on the south border of the city. There is even a active transportation project, a greenway through that area, as well as a transitway being proposed. So we're looking at all these different things that together knit into the overall multimodal network of all these different ways we travel. But we haven't yet talked about active transportation. Perhaps we're saving the best for last. I'm going to invite my colleague Dave McLaughlin to speak to you. He is our national active transportation lead for WSP in Canada, and he's a nearby resident too. He lives in Aurora and is very familiar with Richmond Hill. Dave, can you come on to speak about active transportation?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brett, and thanks, everyone. You know, one of the common themes you've heard through this presentation by city staff and Brett is active transportation, how it's part of a multimodal system and how it's being integrated in Richmond Hill. It's a really key component of this master plan, and we want to talk a little bit about that. So if we could have the next slide. Next, please. Right. So one of the things that is really changing at the municipal level, especially in Richmond Hill, is that infrastructure is being designed to accommodate the biggest majority of the population, which you see on the left here, the interested but concerned. In the past, you know, over the last 20 or so years, municipalities were focusing on easy wins, putting paint down for bike lanes by narrowing up travel lanes, and they were doing that to sort of get the somewhat confident and with a goal of getting 3, 5, 6% of the population to bike. And they had some success. Many municipalities have, including Richmond Hill, in doing that. But the reality is to have a full multimodal system and to connect people first mile, last mile. So from your home to public transit, walking and cycling is a critical component to make that successful, and to give people the opportunity to think about other ways of traveling in the city beyond just hopping in your car and whipping out to the corner store. If you build the infrastructure and it's convenient for them to access it, it's cheaper for them to use, it's a facility they feel safe using, and they enjoy the experience, then we're going to get more people using that infrastructure. So that's a key principle of this master plan. We are applying the most current best practices on design that have been adopted for the province of Ontario and endorsed by MTO and the planning and engineering community. And there is a movement towards more dedicated and physically separated infrastructure, especially on the cycling side. You've been seeing that. Brett showed you an example of lake to lake. We have a multi-use pathway in the boulevard of a road. You'll see cycle tracks being built in a number of different locations, both in the municipality, in Richmond Hill and all around Markham and Aurora, Newmarket, Toronto, of course. And you'll see more and more of those. And in fact, as we build new roads in locations where new development is occurring, those new roads will have AT infrastructure and will likely be above the curb in the boulevard, because actually the cost to build the cycling infrastructure and that whole road, it's cheaper to put the bike facilities above the curb than on the asphalt, because you're not building as wide an asphalt road between the two curbs. So there's actually money saving there for new roads. But to retrofit old roads, we're really talking about repurposing space, narrowing travel lanes a little bit on local roads and collector roads, and sometimes adjusting the location of curbs when a road comes up for, at the end of its life cycle and it has to be fixed, paved, and some curb work done. That's the opportunity to make those changes in a cost-effective way. But you can't just apply that approach. Otherwise, you end up with a jigsaw puzzle of sort of improvements that don't connect. And a number of people have made that comment earlier on in the Menti exercises about connectivity. Connectivity is critical to a successful AT system, and we're going to show some details about that in a moment. Next slide. So this is really just to reinforce to all of you that, there's a huge movement towards physically separated bike infrastructure, wider pedestrian facilities and sidewalks, better connectivity, better information in terms of signage and pavement markings at intersections to convey to all road users, motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists, where their space is and how they are to interact with one another. You'll notice, 10, 15 years ago, there were hardly any markings on the roads, except for the occasional bike lane. Now you're seeing significant changes. You're seeing green zones where cyclists are. You're seeing tighter curb radii at intersections. You're seeing cross rides where cyclists can actually ride across a crossing, where in the past they were required to dismount and walk their bike across. So lots of changes are occurring. This master plan is taking all of those into place. The whole strategy is to come up with a multifaceted network that really is designed to be comfortable for everyone and respects all ages and abilities. Someone talked about, an age-friendly community. The Active Transportation Network, Sandy is about to present to you in a moment. You have to view it as different systems or layers. There's the recreational system that is all off-road and takes advantage of your wonderful green spaces and trail systems, connects to some multi-use pathways like lake to lake. There's the local neighborhood system that may have sign routes and sidewalks and maybe some bike lanes. And then there's sort of the main primary spine system, which would be physically separated infrastructure that really makes all those key connections. It's really important in a master plan to identify that infrastructure so that when the road improvements occur over time, that, pedestrians and cyclists aren't forgotten, that they're integrated into the design. And that whole integration is part of this concept that municipalities are applying, including Richmond Hill, called complete streets. And complete streets is really thinking about when improvements are made to a street, understanding all the various uses that could be accommodated on it. It doesn't mean every use, it doesn't mean every street will be a transit street, for example, but it does mean that there are opportunities to think about all users of the corridor. Streets are not just for moving cars. They're about destinations, they're about places, they're about enjoying the environment. It's about connecting to your neighbors, walking to public transit, walking home. We need to design our streets in a better way that people are feeling safer and are more comfortable to use. And we're hopeful to use some of the AT infrastructure that the city is planning over the long term. So the next slide, I'm going to pass it over to Sandy. And Sandy's going to walk you through some of the key priority areas and show you a few maps. And I know it's hard to see all those dashed lines, as Brett said. We're not expecting you to squint. At the end of the exercise, there's a tool that we're going to show you that you can access during today, but also over the next 2 weeks, you can go on in your own time. You can look at what's being proposed. You can go right in and add your comments, like a little Post-it note, and Sandy will give you some instructions at the end of our presentation on how to do that. So Sandy, over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Dave. Hi, everybody. My name is Sandy Yang. I'm a transportation planner with WSP and also a resident of Richmond Hill, so I'm very excited to be here today. As previously mentioned, we started off with our understanding of the existing conditions, knowing about the different options for facility types, and here we're here to understand the needs and desires from the residents of the city to build a proposed active transportation network for the future. Some of the things we looked at, as Dave already mentioned, especially the connections and any potential key gaps and opportunities there. We looked at routes and destinations like schools, other recreational trails, parks, and especially transit hubs to see where we can have more integration between active transportation and transit. Along with our analysis, we also looked at previously proposed routes from plans that were proposed in the past and maybe not yet implemented. And we reviewed this against current best practices and tried to look for additional opportunities where we can provide greater separation and more comfort so that we have separate facilities and separate options for vehicles, cyclists, and pedestrians. The map on the right shows at a high level our proposed draft active transportation network and a few of the routes that we have identified as priority routes. We will be shifting over to another tool soon to be showing the details that you won't be able to see as of right now, but I did want to highlight the fact that we've identified 8 priority routes. These 8 active transportation priority routes are a combination of both on and off-road facility types, including multi-use paths, also on-road cycle paths or cycle lanes. These 8 routes were identified as ones that help build out a connected primary spine network and link to neighborhoods along to destinations and mobility hubs, and overall help support the city's vision for a connected and multimodal network. Along with these 8, on the next slide, if you don't mind shifting over to that, Megan. Here we've also identified 10 local trail projects that focus on recreational off-road trails across the city. Part of the master plan is that we will be identifying these proposed recommendations in different phases so that the recommendations are all achievable by the city. Of the 10 recommendations that we have for the trails, 4 have been called out as being ones that are proposed to be implemented in the short term, which is by 2031, and the others are to be implemented by the medium term, which is 2041. And the 8 active transportation priority routes previously, those would also be identified to be implemented in the short term as they are helping out build that priority spine network. Next slide, please. Overall, the Transportation Master Plan is proposing an increase of about 40% to the active transportation network, with the ultimate network being a total of about 1,461 kilometers. And there is also an additional about 74 kilometers of regional proposed cycling routes on regional roads like Bathurst and Elgin Mills. These routes were identified in the region's transportation master plan. However, the specific facility types or what kind of cycling routes that they'll be is to be determined at a later stage with York Region. So this represents quite a significant increase to the existing network and supports the city's goals in shifting towards providing more comfortable active transportation and sustainable modes of travel. And these will be phased and implemented strategically over the next 30 years as part of the Transportation Master Plan. Next slide, please. And with that, we'll start shifting over to our Miro link, which is sort of like a digital whiteboard. You'll be able to zoom in, see all of the details of the maps that we've presented today, and provide your comments so that we're able to take it back to the drawing board, review them, and see how we can incorporate the comments from the residents who actually use these networks on a day-to-day basis. So I can start by sharing the link into the chat so you don't have to try and copy down all of these letters. And Megan, if you want to stop sharing screen, I can start sharing and we can walk through a quick tutorial before we get started on reviewing each of the different maps.
And again, this tool will be available for a couple weeks after the session tonight. So this is a bit of a cursory review and an opportunity to try your hand at it if you're not familiar with it. But additional comments can please be provided over the next 2 weeks.
Just give a quick moment for people to start rolling in. I do recommend a web browser. Seems to be a little bit easier to navigate the system than by phone.
There was a comment, Sean and Sandy, if people can provide comments other than through the Miro tool. And so I would say again, absolutely. You can type it into the chat and one of our team people can put that sticky note, so to speak, on the map. Or if it's in the chat, we will be able to download that. So we'll have that comment in our comment register. Our final slide, before we end this evening, there will be several different people's contact information from the city as well as my own that you can contact us afterwards. And we can, we want to engage. But I'll go back to you, Sandy, just for a quick demonstration, because we think this tool is fun and a good way to get people involved. So we hope that you'll participate with us. Sandy?
Great, thank you. So I've just brought everybody over to my view at the moment. We have a quick tutorial just written out in case you are back maybe in the next week or so and you want to share with friends and family. This provides you a quick overview of how you can use this whiteboard. But I'm going to start panning over to one of our maps and zooming in just to show you the main tools that we'll be using today. So the first one I want to show you is the sticky note function. You can also hit N on your keyboard as a quick link. You can choose different colors or just start dragging to start putting in your sticky note. The good thing about a digital whiteboard is that you can type as much as you want and it will all fit in here. So for example, if I want to leave a comment that says, I like this bike lane, it links to my library, comment like that, you can type as much as you want and it can all fit into the slide. Then the next tool to show us where you are talking about is the connection line. You can draw an arrow from your sticky note over to and drag it over to your point so that we are able to move the sticky notes but not lose where the link or specific area that you are talking about is. This way we can keep track and still be a little bit more organized. And the last tool I want to go over today is the comment function. If you see a sticky note that you like or you want to respond to, add more comments, you can use the comment function, tap the sticky note or the location, add your comment this way, and then once we move the sticky note, we can also keep track of any attached comments to that. So with that, I will release everybody from my view and I will pass it back over to you, Sean, to guide us through our discussions tonight.
Great, thank you. So the map will be hard to keep up with all of you folks are adding comments, but we'll kind of scan the map, kind of a cursory review and read off some of the comments that are being provided. Again, if this is up for another 2 weeks, but you can also provide your comments to us through the chat feature. We'll be monitoring that and we'll be reading those out, and then we can input those at a later date. One of the neat things about this tool is whatever comments you provide tonight, you can come back over the next 2 weeks and see if there's additional comments that have been provided to that. It becomes a bit of a virtual / visual discussion board, as well as adding additional thoughts as you further contemplate on what the things are you would be great for the project team to know as they consider moving forward. There's 3 maps present. The first one is the active transportation and trail, and the second is road. And those are ones that are of particular significance to the project team, as their influence and their design is something that the city can uptake fairly readily and easily. The third map is for transit, and due to the regional nature of this area, the city of Richmond Hill is not the only voice with regards to transit. So these comments will certainly capture them and provide them, but there may be less ability to implement them just due to their regional nature and the decision makers that are involved in making decisions with regards to this particular section and how the network functions beyond the boundaries of Richmond Hill. So if we can go back to the active transportation and trails map. And a question here is, what is the URL link for this? It's in the chat. And that's likely the easiest way to access it now. And then you can bookmark it and forward it to others. And it's just been reinserted just to make it easier for you. So we have the first comment here, testing my eyesight, but we need buffered bike lanes on Yonge, preferable a bike lane that allows overtaking or passing of cyclists. And some of the prior maps that in the technical presentation we were showing with the dotted lines and solid lines, it was very, very hard to see. We can zoom right into any level of granularity on this to see what's going on, and the legend on the side to help define that. So Sandy, if we can zoom out just a bit and see if there's any comments. Oh, and you can see right below the map, the 8 priority areas are noted that Sandy spoke to in her presentation. So a comment here, pedestrian hazards, absence of sidewalks, pedestrians bypassing by climbing the hill to 60th from Red Maple or crossing the railroad to get to bus stops and plaza. Fences have been cut at the railroad, graffiti and trash, a major problem by the bridge. And I believe we have a reference arrow there to the intersection just to the left.
I think, Sean, I might add if I can. Brett mentioned earlier in the presentation about the lines on the map. You can see by this map that the city of Richmond Hill is taking a very serious attempt at developing a multimodal transportation system with a significant emphasis on connecting off-road trail systems for recreational users, providing connections in all the various residential neighborhoods to collector roads and also to arterial roads, many of which are under the jurisdiction of York Region, but building this sort of spine network. And if you can even picture where you live or where others live or where you want to go, consideration was given to where key commercial and recreational destinations are, where all the schools are, where all the parks and recreation facilities are. A lot of thought went into this. Many of these roads, if not most of them, were assessed in the field as well to think about what would need to be done to incorporate the appropriate facility type, whether it be a cycle track or another sidewalk on the other side of the road, or bike lanes or buffered bike lanes. You'll see paved shoulders as well, or an edge line treatment, which again is basically repurposing space between the curbs of roads and creating more space for cyclists. And the goal is to try to make the bike lanes a little bit wider. and to provide that separation, especially on higher volume and higher speed roads. Someone made a comment earlier about Highway 7 and about the buffered bike lanes that were implemented as part of the Viva Next project. That was in the planning stage 15 years ago using design guidelines at the time that people thought might be appropriate. But a buffer was created in there, and someone else made the right comment as well that when that road is rehabbed and resurfaced in the future, and it will come soon, there is an opportunity for York Region to revisit and to put in physical separation in those buffer zones to actually provide a more comfortable environment for cyclists. It's a big road, and it's a key road for Richmond Hill, as are some of the other roads. But it's a good example of what we don't want to do. We don't want to just put paint down on a busy road, especially a 4-lane road. In fact, the new design guidelines for the province of Ontario identify that conventional bike lanes, which is just that little white line you see, are no longer appropriate for 4-lane roads or greater. It should be a spatially, if not physically separated piece of cycling infrastructure. And all those new design guidelines have been applied to this master plan, so that Richmond Hill is actually the beneficiary of one of the most current approaches to implementing or designing and implementing active transportation infrastructure in the province. It'll be one of the most comprehensive transportation master plans integrating this new design guidance. Back to you, Sean.
Thank you, Dave. Pre-COVID, when we would have met in person, this would be a big rollout map over about 4 or 5 tables, and there'd be sticky notes and Sharpies gathered around. So I hope, this is our best reproduction that we can do, which through the online medium, we can reach more people than would be able to take some time and come join us at a physical open house. But as you look at this map with the Post-it notes on the side that you can drag over, tie in with the arrow, provide your comments, there's an opportunity to put the Post-it notes on that big rollout map on the table in the middle of the room, but to do it virtually. The comment here is improved parking for Oak Ridge's trailhead, more spaces, better snow removal, and cover up potholes at entrance.
I was going to say, Sean, we encourage all of you to take your time after this evening's meeting. We didn't actually expect everyone to go in and add all their comments. Yeah. If this is meant to be an exercise, just to show you the tool that we're providing all of you to take away and actually spend the time, think about it, talk to your family, talk to your colleagues, email the link to your friends and family who you think might be interested. We want you to help us to get the word out and to get your input, but also to get input from others. So we encourage you to do that, and we'd love to see in 2 or 3 weeks, 2 weeks, this full of comments and suggestions. And if you have suggestions or ideas that you think something should be changed, tell us why. We're very interested in understanding, if you think a road should be added in the AT network, for example, or if, a road that you see a cycle track or bike lanes on should actually be a multi-use pathway in the boulevard, not between the curves of the road. Tell us, let us know and explain why you think that should be a better approach. We're very interested in your input.
And a request to share the link again. Megan, if you don't mind dropping that in. And Dave, to echo your points, tonight is a bit of a tutorial for this tool, kind of taking the dust off of it and showing you a little bit of its potential, but we'd love to get further feedback over the next couple of weeks. Post a note on the side here, reading, take better care of cyclists and allow for safer roads rather than one for cars. Sandy, if we can scoot over to the next map. We've got some comments there. We just want to touch on those. Protect our environmental lands and avoid building more single-family homes. And it looks like that is situated right in the environmental reserve or greenbelt area. We'll highlight a couple of comments down below. On the left of the screen, so many of these communities are poorly planned and disconnected. Connecting these so it is easier for transit would be very helpful. In the middle of your screen, you'll see grid-based planned communities are very helpful for infrastructure. And putting a grade separator or separation might be fine, but to walk across Wildrick is already a death-defying exercise. And I'm certain that with future road, a railway separation will give more reason for more people to go this way and even faster. So I think what we'll do is let's transition to the kind of the ending of the formal presentation. We can take comments through the chat, or you can raise your hands and we'll activate your mic for you. If you have questions or comments on this, you can certainly let us know through the chat, and we'll work with you behind the scenes to make sure that you are comfortable and have access to that map, both tonight and for the next couple of weeks. We're just waiting for Megan to put the screen back on for us for the presentation. And again, that URL for the Miro tool, it's in the chat 3 different times, and we'll include it again before we wrap up tonight, just to keep it top and easy access for you. So let's go to the next slide.
And I was going to go ahead, Sean, and just tell everybody about the next steps. And then if you could help us facilitate any question and answer, we want to respect people's time, but we do still have some time here tonight. I was just turning to the right to check the clock. We're going to be summarizing the input received, which is why it's so helpful to have it on these different, through these different tools and in the chat. It's easier for us to document all of that, because that input is going to help us to adjust and refine the improvements that we're showing here tonight on these different maps where we have recommendations, so that we can produce a draft transportation master plan that has infrastructure as well as policy. The city spoke about policy in the first half of the presentation as being those 2 things have to come together to enable the change, to enable the future that we want to see, so that we'll be able to prepare this draft report in the second half of this year, Q3, maybe Q4, as Hubert was speaking about, so that we can finish that by the end of this year, in line with the official plan. So we have a couple of links on the screen as well. That top one is specific to the transportation master plan and the work we're doing here tonight. And these slides will be made available on that top Moving Richmond Hill website. But we did want to put a plug in as well that the city is undertaking an update of its official plan. You might be aware of that and be engaged in some of those activities. The official plan really is the overall umbrella document that guides development in your city, and the transportation master plan will be incorporated into that. That's why your input here is very important. We work with the land use and the transportation to bring it all together into that official plan document. So you can also see a link to information on that. But we welcome your comments. Hubert and Tong were presenting in the first part of the presentation, and I'm Brett Sears. There on the screen, you can see our email contact information. There's a number of other staff that are on this call here tonight. That is our next steps, but in our remaining time, Sean, I know there's been a number of items in the chat and I couldn't keep up with all of that. I don't know if we want to maybe facilitate, if you could help us facilitate any question and answer that we might want to provide from questions in the chat, as well as if someone would like to raise their hand and come off of mute and ask a question, we'd be happy to hear. And between myself and Dave and Sandy and members of the city's team, I'm sure we're happy to provide an answer.
Perfect. It looks like I got 1 hand raised for Dan. Dan, you should be able to unmute your mic. Dan, are we able to connect with you here? Dan, it looks like we're not connecting. If you can put in the chat and we'll try again. We'll go to our next raised hand here. Please go ahead. You should see an indication that you're able to unmute your mic. Well, I apologize. It appears that is not working for us tonight.
Perhaps, Sean, we could ask people just to type in the chat
Yes.
any questions they were otherwise going to introduce verbally. And in the meantime, while they're doing that, there's a few other questions you might want to go through and ask the team, either Brett or I or Sandy or city staff who are on.
Scrolling to the top of the chat, it's been very active, which is fantastic. One question here, would the city appropriate the land to put in the service road parallel to Yonge?
Tong, do you want to start with that? Would you like me to start with a response?
Yeah, so I think I just want to highlight when it comes to the road, I guess, connecting from Garden Avenue to Carville. I guess the alignment that we're showing right now is still very conceptual through the Transportation Master Plan. We're following the EA process. And ultimately, the alignment of that road and any land requirements will be determined through the Schedule C EA, a more detailed EA process that will include its own consultation process. So it's very likely that right now you see on our maps is a very straight road that connects from Garden to Carville. It might not be that straight once we look at sort of the feasibility of it. So I guess in terms of land requirements, and that will be determined through that follow-up EA.
We have a comment here early in the evening about what about support for Richmond Hill's aspiration to be an age-friendly community? I think that's been touched on, but let's take just a little bit of time and just further add to that to ensure we've covered that off.
Maybe I'll take that one.
Please, Dave.
So it's a really good question too, actually. Being someone who's approaching 60, getting around a community is really important, and it's just not by car. So you can tell by the map we showed you from an active transportation perspective, we're really trying to design infrastructure for all ages and abilities, and infrastructure that people are comfortable using and is designed to be accessible. So all those aspects of planning and design have been integrated into this Transportation Master Plan. We're very cognizant of the aging population and how important it is to get people out and about, walking for recreation and to go for short distance trips to the nearest store, to visit friends. So this infrastructure that you're seeing on the maps is all been designed to sort of support an age-friendly community. And there'll be other programs and initiatives that the city and York Region will be introducing as well, along with infrastructure to encourage people to use it over time. But age-friendly is a really important component of this master plan.
Question here, start a little bit of a dialogue, is how many bikers and walkers were out last Friday? And following, how many days in every year will be like last Friday? Or how long does a typical winter last in Richmond Hill? Simply we're alluding to weather, both wonderfully warm and mild to the opposite, and how that impacts or influences the technical work and the outcomes that will be finally recommended.
Yeah, I think, do you want to just go right ahead, Dave, or you want me to start?
Let me start. I mean,
Go ahead.
It's very clear, as we all know, that there are fewer people who are walking and cycling in the wintertime, except those who are accessing public transit. We know that that's the case in all winter cities around the world. However, one of the things that we are seeing around the world and in Canada and in Ontario is a very significant increase in people trying to walk and cycle all year, including in winter. And municipalities are dealing with that because they're increasingly being pressured, including councilors, to discuss winter maintenance, to improve winter maintenance, to provide more accessible cycling infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure, and to increase the level of service. And that's a reflection of the fact that more people are out in the winter using that infrastructure. So we're going to see more and more of that over time. We know that's happening. And this plan is also taking that into account. And remember, the infrastructure is designed for all year, all use, and all seasons. It doesn't mean that we're only building infrastructure for people to walk or bike during, nice, warm, sunny days in the summer and spring and fall. It's year round. It's really important to think about that. And we have in developing this master plan. Right?
That's great. Thank you. I think that's a great answer. Thanks.
Next question, has the bus lane on Yonge Street helped traffic and buses move faster?
I don't know if anyone from the city has a specific data on hand. Certainly as someone who has taken the BRT in the dedicated lane, it is faster than if it's in a general purpose lane like before they built that. Does it cut the time in half? Probably not, but it's certainly like my personal experience is the bus stops, they have a shelter that's heated. When the next bus is coming, and if there is a red signal, at least you go to the front of the line and you're not stuck way behind that. And so I think my personal experience is in some of the more congested areas that BRT would beat a car. That's just been my own personal experience. I'm not sure if anyone from the city has specific data on that though.
While we don't have specific data on hand right now, we can certainly look further into that and connect with our colleagues at YRT, York Region Transit. And I think the important takeaway here is that YRT, together with the city, we're looking to provide more travel options for commuters and travelers within the city of Richmond Hill and traveling through the city of Richmond Hill. So the more options we provide, the better it is for commuting purposes.
And we have someone else that have raised their hand. So you should be seeing it pop up on your screen to unmute. So if you want to unmute your mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm the first one who worked. Okay, following that question, I can see that YRT may be moving around, checking around faster, but I see the more cars are stacking behind red lights, because you can't turn left on Yonge and Carview, or from northbound Yonge and Carview. Well, right now I'm living in the area. I don't go Yonge anymore because it's so convenient. It takes like triple the time to go through Carview. So does it make any good? Because I see most of the YRT buses, they are still empty. Like I can see a bus driver on the bus. I can see a handful of passengers on the bus. So does it make the commuting better or worse? That's my question. You are talking about the 5 or 10 years of maybe even 30 years plan, but how about right now? Same thing happens on Highway 7. After this mid-lane YRT bus lane was there, the Highway 7 is becoming ever more congested. That's just because of that same lane. It's a bad idea for the local commuters, for the commuters coming to the city. Are you going to do anything about it? A second thing is, I see that the bus lane and south of the Clark on Yonge works pretty well because they are on the side. It's not in the middle. Like they can share with the car. The car has to have like a 3 more or more people inside the driver lane. I don't know if this thing is really baffling people. Like I've seen like my neighbor, they are getting rid of driving on the yard just to take a look at the car piling up in front of the red light.
Thank you. We appreciate those comments. We're hearing a strong request for safety and for, changes 20, 30 years from now are great, but today there are needs. So appreciate your comments on that, and those are certainly captured. To the technical team.
Yeah, I don't know who wants to start in on this, but I would say the bus rapid transit does have a faster time than if you are on so the Viva is run by YRT. There's some questions about that. And the Viva is only stopping at certain locations to try to enable people to get where they're going faster. They have that honor system that you have to pay, so you don't have to stop and wait for everyone to pay the driver at the front, so people can get on and get off quickly to try to improve the travel time to make it more competitive with the car. Along where the Viva is located, both on Highway 7 and on Yonge Street, those are areas for intensification. And so with more people and jobs coming to those areas, that is more people who potentially will be riding that. And there's been some conversation in the chat on how many people are riding this. Transit is serving a number of uses. It is providing accessibility to jobs and schools for people who might need that, providing people alternatives to traveling by car for those who choose that way or might need it for any of many reasons. And it certainly, we need to all try to for the short term. I mean, have we tried it? Have I myself tried it? Well, I can say I have tried it, but how do we get other people involved? And as the city grows, we see that in those intensification areas, there will be more likely, there will be a higher population of jobs and people, and you may see then more uptake of people riding the transit as well. There was several questions in that, Sean, but that's how I would try to answer that. So it's something that is available for everyone today, and in my professional opinion, the ridership is going to grow as time goes on.
Thank you. And looks like, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Mr. Faraz Amrulala, are you able to share your thoughts with us? Unfortunately, that's a bit of an issue there. But please type them into the chat. We want to make sure we hear from each of you.
Hello.
Hello, is this Graham?
Yes, hi, how are you?
Good, go ahead, Graham.
Okay, well, I just first of all, I want to say I want to give you a positive feedback here. I think you're on the right track here. We do need to be building more multimodal lanes, but I come at it from a slightly different perspective. The fundamental problem that the GTA faces is like we have enormous growth, right? And you know how the Ford government has this whole plan for 1.5 million homes in Ontario. That translates to like 1 million in the GTA. And if you work at the basis of, if you look at it from the basis of, well, almost every house these days needs 2 cars, every home. If we have it, okay, if you have a million new homes in the GTA, that's that's going to be 2 million new cars, probably something less. But the fundamental issue goes back to we're heading for a disaster in our ability to actually get around. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is we'll be able to solve the problem is if we can kind of refocus our society around having fewer car trips. And so I like a lot of the ideas that you have here. I like the ideas of bikes and so forth and using that. But I want to also ask questions about kind of multi-use zoning and things like that, because the part of the problem that we have, I think, particularly in a lot of the suburban areas, is, if you want to go, if you want to do anything, you have to get in your car. You want to go to the grocery store, you got to get in your car. Well, it would be really nice if we actually didn't have all of the, all of the commercial just on Yonge Street or just on Carville or whatever. It needs to be, we need to have a much more integrated environment where people can actually get around. And if you want, I think in one of your slides, you talked about, how they have really good transit in London and places like that. That's the kind of thing that we need to be doing. And so the question I have is, we have, you're planning some good ideas here, but we really need to be thinking in even a broader way about how we can actually reshape ourselves so that we don't have to always go into the car, because otherwise we're just going to choke ourselves.
Thank you, Graham.
Okay.
Responses from the technical team.
Yeah, I would just start, Sean, by saying we are trying to show tonight through these slides that we are looking outside of the car, and certainly if you have a chance to look at those Miro boards again, I don't know if you were able to get on those or not. You can zoom in and you can see just the commitment that the city is making to alternatives, to more sustainable travel, which I personally think is commendable. So we are trying to make it more and more viable to travel outside the car. I'm fortunate to have a car. Sounds like maybe you do as well, but not everyone does, and for a number of different reasons. And so we need to think of everyone. We're planning for the entire city, all the people who are here, all the people who may be here in the future, and we want to give them those different options. And as also on our screen right here, the city is updating that official plan, which is heavily on land use. And so we are trying to work together and coordinate with those staff so that we can bring together the transportation and the land use. They cannot be exclusive. They have to work hand in hand. And that's why when we showed our maps to show like where the future population is going, that's where we're trying to focus our transportation investment as well, to make sure there is ways to get around by different modes, and to help make that land use work as best we can.
Okay. Thanks, Brad. A comment to your question: will there be plans to increase the number of train trips on the Richmond Hill corridor and to expand the parking lot at Richmond Hill GO station? And the side note is the larger parking lot appears to have been sold or no longer in use. Oh, sorry, and the answer is already there.
Okay.
Perfect. The plan, I believe, is to build high rises where that parking lot is.
Was that
Sorry,
a
Sean,
response?
maybe just to add a quick comment to that question as well, asking about sort of the land use. And I think I really like that comment, and we definitely echo those sentiments as well, which is why the Transportation Master Plan is very closely linked with our official plan update process. And I guess the challenge of managing trips and sort of mitigating those car trips is very tied to land use, and sort of having those mixed uses and being able to make trips shorter. So I think I would definitely encourage you to follow the city's official plan update as well, and we will definitely echo those comments internally to the official plan update team.
Thank you. I'm scrolling, trying to make sure I don't miss anything. If I do, don't worry. All of this is going to be pulled into this transcript and then provided as a summary to the technical team. Question here: how can we also contribute to the York Region Master Plan? And I believe that's tying out of the comment right before, is why is Richmond Hill the only city in York Region to refuse to install traffic calming devices on existing roads?
If it's a traffic comment, I might ask Tong or Hubert to answer that.
Yeah, I can provide a response for this one. So in terms of traffic calming specifically, there is a traffic safety and operations strategy that's ongoing right now. And my team is undertaking that update as well. And we are in fact looking at a toolbox of traffic calming devices that would be implementable in the future. So it is well underway, and we can provide some updates at a later time.
Okay. Then a comment here. I haven't seen or heard anything tonight that indicates that there's a real strategy to address the needs of seniors. We also need shade if we want people to walk anywhere in the summer. I know, Dave, you talked a little bit about all ages and abilities, or certainly to accommodate all the demographics. But any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know, Tom, if we have someone from Parks and Recreation, but maybe I'll just add that as part of the streetscape and design guidelines that the city has as they build infrastructure, consideration of tree plantings and shade is a really important consideration as we deal with climate change, and all municipalities are looking at that. So when we design streets and boulevards now, there's a big focus on how we can integrate trees and different types of plantings into the natural environment. So it is a very big consideration. Yes, it takes time for them to grow, to generate that shade profile. And there are locations where the boulevard may not be wide enough to accommodate, for example, a tree. That's the challenge that, and lessons learned over the years, that you can't just plant a tree in a little space between a sidewalk and a curb and expect it to survive and really generate that kind of protection from the sun that you're looking for. You have to think about the space. You have to be very strategic and apply the best practices from our specialists in landscape architecture and urban design. I don't know, Tom or Hubert, you want to add to that?
No, I don't have anything too much more to add. I think, through our city standards update process, we do strongly consider the availability of street trees into our cross sections. And generally speaking, we do try to accommodate healthy trees on both sides of the road. And I know we have staff from those teams here on the call with us. So I have to say this. And I think when it comes to tree planting, we've seen that there are sort of new technologies, new ways to keep those trees healthy. That enables us to sort of use some of that space for other types of facilities, but also grow sort of those large, healthy trees that provide sort of that shading.
And as I scan, I believe that captures all the questions. Sasha, sorry, you activated your mic. Did you have a?
No, I was just going to add to Dave and Don. They pretty much addressed the tree sort of question with regard to on municipal roads, and the city does have an urban forestry strategy, and we are aiming to increase the amount of tree coverage within the city.
Thank you. I was going to say that I believe I've captured all the key questions for the technical staff here. If I've missed something, please put it in the chat. We do have time left in this session. However, respecting your time, we're here and as long as we need to be. But we want to ensure that in that time, we're able to get to the questions that matter most to you folks. And of course, another plug for the Menti tool and the Miro tool to go on those after the fact and to access those and provide further feedback. This slide deck will be provided on that RichmondHill.ca /MovingRH webpage, and the links will be included in there also to those engagement tools to gather your feedback. And we'd love to hear your voices too. If you have a question or that you'd like to ask the team, just raise your hand and we'll be able to activate your mic for you. Blair, go ahead.
Hello, it's Blair Kingsland here in Richmond Hill. I did post a question there regarding traffic signaling. I thought I'd maybe just ask it in person. It's regarding traffic signaling where a lot of signals seem to be red when you drive along the major routes. Sometimes every signal is red when you go along. And I know from contacting the York Region Traffic Department over the years that a lot of these signals are just have a random trigger for a crossroad, or they're on a timer, which is not really synchronized or coordinated with any adjacent signal. I'm wondering, why can they not put a little bit more effort into coordinating and synchronizing some of these signals, especially ones that are near a major intersection, where at a major intersection, you get a green light, you go 400 meters, you get a red light. I don't know why that happens. It should be so easy to just make that next light always a green, and I don't know why they don't do that. Can anyone talk about that? I know it's done by York Region Traffic, but still I'm asking you guys at Richmond Hill if you can comment on it.
Thanks, Blair.
I can start with that, and then others can comment if they'd like. The technology certainly has been around, Blair, to do that, but it's easier said than done at the same time, because traffic will change, and the region will have to constantly try to refine and monitor the traffic to make sure that those signals are working properly. And the other thing is that they can only do that for at most 2 directions, right? And so sometimes if the peak direction is, say, south, then they'll try to coordinate the signals going south, but that's at the expense of anyone going east or west. So it's something I think that there are a lot of good people who are working on that, but it's a little bit easier said than done when we have trends in the traffic, but it doesn't always go the exactly same way. And we're trying to, I would say although we're not specifically, we at WSP are not specifically working on that. Like you said, it's maybe York Region. It's certainly a desired, everyone wants to get the traffic moving as efficiently as possible. And so it's an ongoing effort to refine this and to study, and what works like for one season might not work for the next. So that's why sometimes you might see different things like that happen. Also, because you can typically only do that for 2 directions at the most. So other directions may have a longer wait if they're not, say, like the peak direction that they're trying to accommodate during that period.
Yeah, but I can add to that as well. And I think to the best of my knowledge, there are plans from the region as part of their new road EAs, for example, 16th Avenue, to have coordinated signals along those corridors. But I think where that sentiment comes from is there are challenges with coordinating signals. For example, when you coordinate a signal at a major corridor, if you coordinate one direction, that reduces the level of coordination for the other direction. So I guess the end result for the user experience is you'll get more reds. And another challenge for example, Highway 7, that competes with transit signal priority, and that can impact the signal timing there as well, which can result in I guess, the end user experience hitting more reds. But there is sort of that baseline coordination. But I think in terms of speaking to where that coordination exists, we would have to follow up with the region on that one.
Or we could always implement what Graham has just posted, which is more roundabouts. And roundabouts are part of the equation in thinking about a municipal transportation system. And I think it's important to understand that all options are on the table, for the city of Richmond Hill as they move forward. And some of the options you see in this master plan and some of the ideas are going to be fleshed out in more detail. Tom mentioned a class EA, class environmental assessment, where a lot more detail is applied to a particular corridor before making a final design decision. And so it's important to understand that this master plan doesn't immediately lead to implement what we see in terms of lines on the map. There's another process that takes it to a greater level of detail where design and engineering professionals are brought in to assess the impacts and to understand the costs, and to also reconfirm the timing to make sure that some of these improvements are in place at the right time to accommodate the kind of growth that you're seeing across the municipality. And that's all part of this transportation master plan. Sean?
Thank you. Blair, I see your hand again.
Oh, there it goes.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for saying. It's where over the years, as I've written to the York Region Traffic Department, they have made comments similar to yours, Mr. Sears, about the preferred traffic direction and bi-directional and all these things. I'm sort of just looking at it by observing the lights where it's simply the next signal over, not coordinating direction. Like when you're at an intersection and it goes green and you're going westbound, it doesn't really matter if there's a preferred direction, you're going to that next light no matter what. And I don't know why that next signal can't be made to go green. It seems pretty simple to do, but I just wanted to hear your comments, and I think I'll try and address it with York Region. It's not a major restructuring of the whole signaling system. It's just locally around certain intersections where the next light is so close, and yet it's just you got these huge trucks and the whole platoon starts off, and then in 200 meters it all just stops again. It just seems unnecessary. But thanks for your comment.
Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for coming off of mute to say that. Sean, I have noticed that our attendees are dropping and we are a little bit beyond our time. Is it appropriate to wrap this up then? And we can
Yes,
have,
let's do an official wrap up. And if anyone wants to stay on, the technical team, we can stay on for a little bit longer, of course. On behalf of the WSP team and as your facilitator for session tonight, I've really enjoyed working with you. The comments have been very positive, very diverse, which always makes for better engagement. So certainly really appreciate your time and your effort. And I look forward to seeing your further comments through the Miro tool and the Menti tool over the next couple of weeks and or emails into with the project leads. So that I'll turn it over to Dan to officially close us off.
Thanks, Sean. Just once again, I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for taking their time this evening to participate in this. Just reading through all the comments and all the input, there's just a lot of valuable comments and input that we want to take away. Certainly things to be considered as we move forward to finalize this transportation master plan. And I think, you know, in some of the comments that were raised tonight, the one thing I just want to clarify for everybody that the transportation master plan is just really the beginning of this journey for the city. And I think, you know, a lot of the recommendations and the outcomes of this transportation master plan will lead to other things that I think we've touched on throughout the evening. Updates to standards to make our transit facility or our roads and our transportation facilities more age-friendly, more user-friendly to accommodate all sorts of mobility, to put in policies in place with respect to traffic safety and other things and all sorts of things, and to tie this all into the official plan, the way we sort of plan our communities as well. So I just want to reassure everybody that this is just the beginning of the journey, and all your input will be taken into consideration, valuable. And as you can see on this last slide here, if anybody does have any further input they want to add, the Menti and the other exercise will be open for a couple of more weeks. And if there's any other questions, you can certainly contact my team. You can reach out to Hubert or to Tong with your questions, or you can reach out to Brett as well.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful night.
Good night, everyone.